Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Playing with Power MTG, where we play with the most powerful cards in the most powerful formats. Tonight's game is brought to you by TCGplayer.com, where you can find all of your cards online while still supporting local game stores, Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks, and through Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Another round of Boxing League is here. Our last video had each player opening 6 packs to add to their Boxing League pool, and now we are doing it again. Each player opened 6 more packs and updated their decks. Most players are fully settled into their commanders, and one decided to switch commanders again. If you wanted to find out more about the Boxing League, check out the link in the description below. If you want to try out the Boxing League for yourself, pick up some product from TCGplayer.com. They have great prices on sealed product, so you can start a Boxing League of your own. Check out the link in the description below. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Zach piloting Kaza, Royal Chaser. Zach opened War of the Spark as his packs for this round, and decided that an Izzet Spellslinger deck with Kaza at the helm would be a good direction to take. Zach's opening hand contains a Wall of Runes, Tail's End, Augur of Golos, Myriad Construct, Island, and 2 mountains. Next, we have Ryan piloting Tatyova, Benthic Druid. Ryan opened Theros, Beyond Death as his packs for this round, and added some big creatures to his card pool. Ryan's opening hand contains a Nyxborn Colossus, Deep Freeze, 4 islands, and his London Mulligan is an island. After that we have Mike piloting Brokkos, Apex of Forever. Mike also opened Theros Beyond Death as his packs for this round, and added some more synergies to help his mutate strategy. Mike's opening hand contains a Corpse Churn, Thieving Otter, Durable Coilbug, Negate, Jungle Hollow, and 2 islands. Finally, we have Folger piloting Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. Folger decided to open Ikoria as his packs for this round, and added some large creatures to better help apply pressure to the table. Folger's opening hand contains an Anticipate, Winged Words, Renowned Weaponsmith, Octoprophet, Mountain, Temple of Epiphany, and a Temple of Silence. Without further ado, let's kick off the zany zeitgeist of Zealous Duologists. Zach wins the "How many commanders are you going to build in this Boxing League?" challenge, and gets to start us off. Zach draws a card for turn, and then plays an island. He casts Wall of Runes, scrying 1. Zach passes. Ryan draws a card for turn, and then plays an island. He passes. Mike draws a card for turn, and then plays a Jungle Hollow, into play tapped, gaining 1 life. Mike passes. Folger draws a card for turn, and then plays a Temple of Epiphany, into play tapped, scrying 1 as it enters. Folger passes. Zach draws, and then plays a mountain for turn. He casts Augur of Bolas. Bolas enters, Zach looks at the top 3, and then reveals a Nahiri's Lithoforming into his hand, and puts the rest on bottom. Zach ends his turn. Ryan draws, and then plays an island for turn. He ships the turn to Mike. Mike draws, and also plays an island for turn. Mike gives the turn to Folger. Folger draws, and then plays a forest for turn. He casts a Renowned Weaponsmith. This is the best turn 2 play in his deck, and Folger ends his turn. Zach draws, and then plays an island for turn. He casts his commander, Kaza, Royal Chaser. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with his Augur of Bolas. Ryan takes it, and Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws, and then plays a forest for turn. He passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike casts Corpse Churn. He mills 4 cards, and then returns Tomebound Lich to his hand. Mike draws, and then plays an island. He casts Tomebound Lich, drawing and discarding as it enters. Mike passes the turn. Folger draws, and then plays an island. He casts his commander, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. In response, Zach activates his commander, Kaza, to reduce his instant and sorcery spells. He then casts Tail's End. Golos is countered, and Folger passes the turn. Zach draws, and then plays a mountain for turn. He casts Spitfire Lagak. He attacks Folger with Kaza and Augur. Folger takes it, and Zach passes to Ryan. Ryan draws, and then plays an island for turn. He casts Reign of Revelation, drawing 3 and discarding a card. Ryan passes. Mike draws, and then moves to combat. He attacks Folger with his Tomebound Lich. Folger takes it, Mike gains 1, and then Mike draws and discards through the Lich. In his second main phase, he plays a Bonder's Enclave. He casts Migration Path, searching for a swamp and a forest, putting him into play tapped. Finished up, Mike passes. Folger draws, and then plays a Temple of Silence, scrying 1 as it enters. He casts Winged Words, drawing 2 cards. Folger passes. Zach draws, and then plays an island for turn. Spitfire Lagak triggers, and deals 1 damage to each opponent. Zach taps Kaza to activate her ability. Zach then casts Field Research, Kicked, drawing 3 cards. He moves to combat, and attacks Ryan with Spitfire Lagak and the Augur. Ryan takes it, and Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws, and then plays an island for turn. He casts his commander, Tatyova, Benthic Druid. Ryan passes. Mike draws, and then moves to combat, attacking Ryan with Tomebound Lich. Ryan takes it, Mike gains 1, and then draws and discards through the Lich. In his second main phase, he mutates Dreamtail Heron onto his Tomebound Lich, drawing a card as it mutates. He plays a forest for turn. With nothing else, Mike passes. Folger draws and then plays a mountain for turn. He recasts his commander, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. Golos enters, and Folger fetches up a Temple of Malady onto the battlefield, scrying 1 as it enters. Finished up, Folger passes. Zach draws and then plays an island for turn. Spitfire Lagak triggers, and each opponent takes 1. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with a Spitfire and the Augur. Mike takes it, and in his second main phase, Zach casts Grotag Nightrunner. Zach ships the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and then plays an island for turn. Tatyova triggers, and Ryan gains 1 life and then draws a card. He casts Deep Freeze, targeting Golos. Golos gets nerfed, and then Ryan moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Tatyova. In response, Mike casts Heartless Act, killing Tatyova. With nothing else, Ryan passes the turn. Mike draws and then moves to combat. He attacks Folger with his Dreamtail Heron. Folger takes it, Mike gains 3, and then draws and discards. In his second main phase, he casts Shifting Ceratops. He then follows up with a Polywog Symbiote. Mike passes the turn. Folger draws and then casts Farfinder. It triggers, and then Folger fetches up a Swamp into his hand. He plays a Swamp for turn. He casts a Boreal Grazer. It triggers, and Folger puts Thornwood Falls onto the battlefield tapped, gaining 1 life. With nothing else, Folger passes. Zach draws and then moves to combat, attacking Ryan with Spitfire, Augur, and the Nightrunner. Ryan then takes 6. Nightrunner triggers, exiling Shell Shield. In his second main phase, Zach plays a mountain. Spitfire triggers, and each opponent takes 1. He casts a Mana Geode, scrying 1 as it enters. Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and then casts Skittering Surveyor. He fetches up a forest into his hand. He plays a forest for turn. He casts Time of Ice. The first lore counter hits, and Ryan taps down Mike's Dreamtail Heron. All through, Ryan passes. Mike draws and then casts a Zagoth Crystal. He casts Mythos of Brokkos, paying blue-black as he casts the spell. He fetches up a Shark Typhoon into his graveyard. He then returns Shark Typhoon and a forest to his hand. He plays a forest for turn. He passes. At the end of Mike's turn, Folger casts Teferi's Time Twist, targeting his own Golos. In response, Mike casts Negate, countering the spell. Dismayed, Folger moves to his turn. Folger draws and then starts off by casting Flood of Tears. In response, Zach activates Kaza to reduce his next spell. He also taps his Geode for mana. With nothing else, Flood of Tears resolves and bounces all non-land permanents. Then Folger puts Farfinder onto the battlefield. Farfinder triggers, and Folger fetches up a Plains into his hand. He plays a Plains for turn. He recasts Renowned Weaponsmith. He recasts a Boreal Grazer. It triggers, but Folger has no more lands in hand. Folger passes the turn. At the end of Folger's turn, Zach casts Into the Royal, kicked, bouncing Renowned Weaponsmith back to Folger's hand, and then Zach draws a card. Zach draws and then starts off his turn by recasting Mana Geode, scrying 1 as it enters. He recasts Augur of Bolas. He looks at the top 3 and reveals a Lull Mage's Domination, putting it into his hand, and then the rest on bottom. He recasts Grotag Nightrunner and then passes the turn, discarding to hand size, discarding Kaza, and putting her back into the command zone. Ryan draws and then recasts Skittering Surveyor. He fetches up a forest into his hand. He plays a forest for turn. He casts Tome Anima. He passes the turn, discarding to hand size. Mike draws and then recasts Tomebound Lich. It enters, and Mike draws and discards. He plays an island for turn. He recasts Shifting Ceratops. He recasts Polywog Symbiote. Mike passes. Folger draws and then plays a Cryptic Caves as his land for turn. He casts Audacious Thief. He recasts Renowned Weaponsmith. Folger passes. Zach draws and then casts Thunder Drake. He casts Spitfire Lagak, triggering his Drake and putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and then casts Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar. This massive creature resolves, and Ryan passes the turn. Mike draws and then starts off by mutating Cavern Whisperer onto Polywog Symbiote. Mutate triggers, and Mike draws and discards. He plays a Swamp for turn. He casts Essence Symbiote. Mike ends his turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Folger casts Anticipate. He looks at the top 3, puts 1 into his hand, and the rest on bottom. Folger draws and then plays a forest for turn. He casts his commander, Golos. Golos enters, and Folger fetches up a Temple of Mystery onto the battlefield, scrying 1 as it enters. Now, with enough resources, he decides to activate Golos. He exiles an island, a forest, and a rugged highlands. With this unfortunate whiff, Folger follows up by casting Adventurous Impulse. He looks at the top 3, reveals a Yarok the Desecrated into his hand, and bottoms the rest. Finished up, Folger passes. Zach draws and then starts off his turn by recasting his commander, Kaza, Royal Chaser. He activates Kaza, reducing his next spell. He casts Bond of Insight. Everyone mills 4, and then Zach returns into the Royal and tails into his hand. Thunderdrake triggers and gets a counter. He attacks Folger with his Thunderdrake. Folger takes 4, and Zach passes the turn, discarding to hand size. Ryan draws and then plays a forest for turn. He recasts Time of Ice. The first lore counter hits, and Ryan taps down Mike's Tomebound Lich. He attacks Mike with Multani. Mike takes 14, and in his second main phase, Ryan recasts Deep Freeze, targeting Folger's Golos. All finished up, Ryan passes the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike activates Bonder's Enclave, drawing a card. Mike draws and then mutates Parcel Beast onto Cavern Whisperer. Mutate triggers, and Mike draws and discards. Essence Symbiote triggers, and Mike gains 2 life and puts a +1/+1 counter on his creature. Then Cavern Whisperer's Mutate triggers, and each opponent discards a card. All through, Mike passes. Folger draws, and then casts Yarok the Desecrated. Still remembering the pain from last game, Zach casts Tail's End, countering Yarok. Folger casts Meteor Golem. It enters, and Folger destroys Deep Freeze. He sacrifices Cryptic Caves to draw a card. He attacks Ryan with his Audacious Thief. Thief triggers, and Folger draws a card and loses 1 life. Ryan blocks with the Tome Anima. Finished up, Folger passes. Zach draws, and then casts Coral Helm Chronicler. Zach looks at the top 5, doesn't find any spells with Kicker, and puts them all on bottom. He attacks Folger with Thunder Drake. Folger takes 4, and Zach passes to Ryan. Ryan draws, and Time of Ice triggers. Ryan targets Cavern Whisperer. In response, Mike activates Parcel Beast's ability, looking at the top card and putting it into his hand. He then flashes in Starlit Mantle, targeting his Cavern Whisperer. In response, Zach activates his Kaza to reduce his next spell. Zach then casts Into the Royal, Kicked, targeting Cavern Whisperer. Coral Helm Chronicler triggers, and Zach draws and discards. Into the Royal resolves, Cavern Whisperer bounces, Zach draws a card, and then the rest of the stack fizzles. Ryan moves to combat and attacks Mike with Multani. Mike takes 14, and in his second main phase, Ryan recasts Tatyova. With nothing else, Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike activates Bonder's Enclave to draw a card. Mike draws and then plays an island for turn. He recasts Polywog Symbiote. He mutates Cavern Whisperer onto Essence Symbiote. Polywog triggers, and Mike draws and discards. Essence Symbiote triggers, Mike gains 2, and then puts a 1/1 counter on the Symbiote. Cavern Whisperer triggers, and each opponent discards a card. Mike then follows up by mutating Parcel Beast onto Cavern Whisperer. The triggers fire again, Mike draws and discards, he gains 2 life, puts a 1/1 counter on his creature, and each opponent discards. He mutates Dreamtail Heron onto Cavern Whisperer. The triggers fire again, Mike draws and discards, he gains 2 life, his creatures get a 1/1 counter, and each opponent discards. Sitting in a good spot, Mike passes. Folger draws and then starts off his turn by activating Golos. He exiles a Tomebound Lich, Risen Reef, and an Evolving Wilds. He casts Tomebound Lich, drawing and discarding as it enters. He casts Risen Reef. Reef enters, Folger looks at the top card of his library, and then reveals a Tranquil Cove and puts it onto the battlefield tapped, gaining 1 life. He plays Evolving Wilds as his land for turn. He sacrifices Evolving Wilds, fetching up a mountain onto the battlefield tapped. Folger ends his turn. Zach draws and then plays an island for turn. Spitfire Lagak triggers, and each opponent takes 1. He activates Kaza, reducing his next spell. He casts Song Mad Treachery, gaining control of Mike's Cavern Whisperer, giving it haste. He attacks Folger with Cavern Whisperer and Thunderdrake. Folger blocks Thunderdrake with his Boreal Grazer and takes 7. In his second main phase, Zach casts Kazul's Fury, sacrificing Cavern Whisperer and dealing 7 more to Folger. Finished up, Zach passes. Ryan draws, and the final lore counter hits Time of Ice, and Ryan sacrifices it. It then bounces all tapped creatures to their owner's hands. Ryan casts Read the Tides, drawing 3 cards. He casts Mox Amber. He plays a forest for turn. Tatyova triggers, Ryan draws, and gains 1 life. He attacks Folger with Multani and Tome Anima, which can't be blocked since Ryan drew more than 1 card this turn. In response, Folger casts Despark, targeting Ryan's Multani. In response, Ryan casts Heroic Intervention. It resolves, and Despark fizzles. Folger blocks Multani with Tomebound Lich, Meteor Golem, and Golnus. Folger then takes 6. With nothing else, Ryan passes. Mike draws and then casts Tomebound Lich. It enters, and Mike draws and discards. He casts Kogla, the Titan 8. It enters, and Mike has it fight Ryan's Tome Anima, killing it. Finished up, Mike passes. Folger draws and then plays an island for turn. He casts Renowned Weaponsmith. He recasts Golos. Golos enters, and Folger fetches up a Dismal Backwater onto the battlefield, gaining 1 life. Folger passes the turn. Zach draws, and then recasts Thundering Drake. He recasts Kaza. Thunder Drake triggers and gets a counter. With nothing else, Zach passes. Ryan draws, and then plays an island for turn. Tatyova triggers, and he gains 1 life and draws a card. He casts Marwyn the Nurturer. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Multani. Folger blocks with everything, which isn't enough, takes the rest, and dies. All through, Ryan ships the turn to Mike. Mike draws and then mutates Brokkos onto his Tomebound Lich. Polywog triggers and Mike draws and discards. He attacks Zach with Kogla. Kogla triggers and Mike destroys Zach's Mana Geode. Zach takes 7 and Mike passes the turn. Zach draws and then starts off his turn by casting Deliberate. He scries 2 and draws a card. He attacks Ryan with Thunder Drake. Ryan takes 3 and Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and then casts Opt. He scries 1 and draws a card. He casts Helm of the Host. He plays a Memorial to Unity as his land for turn, triggering Tatyova, with Ryan gaining 1 and drawing a card. He equips Helm of the Host onto Multani. He moves to combat, Helm triggers, and creates a non-legendary copy of Multani. The table stares down 2 massive creatures on Ryan's board, and Ryan attacks Mike with both Multanis. In response, Mike casts Back for More. He returns Karuga, the Macrosage, to the battlefield. Karuga enters and Mike draws 3 cards. Then Karuga fights Ryan's Marwyn, killing it. Mike then blocks Multani with everything he has. Multani dies, Mike's creatures die, he gains 6 from Brokkos, and then takes 17. With Mike still alive and holding on, Ryan passes. Mike draws and then plays an island for turn. He casts Risen Reef. It enters, and Mike reveals a forest from the top and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. He casts Lead the Stampede. He looks at the top 5 and reveals a Pouncing Shore Shark and a Nadir Kraken into his hand, and then bottoms the rest. He attacks Ryan with Kogla. Kogla triggers, and Mike destroys Ryan's Helm of the Host. Ryan blocks with Skittering Surveyor. In his second main phase, Mike casts Chainweb Arachnir, entering and dealing 1 damage to Zach's Kaza. With nothing else, Mike passes. Zach draws and then moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Grotag Nightrunner and Ryan with Spitfire Lagak and Thunder Drake. Both take the hit, Nightrunner triggers, and Zach exiles Crawling Barrens from the top of his library. He plays Crawling Barrens as his land for turn. Lagak triggers, and each opponent takes 1. Zach passes the turn. At the end of Zach's turn, Ryan pays 2 and returns 2 lands to return Multani from his graveyard to his hand. Ryan draws and then plays a forest for turn. Tatyova triggers, and Ryan draws 1 and gains 1 life. He recasts Multani. He then casts Colossal Dreadmaw. He attacks Zach with his Multani token. Zach takes 16, and Ryan passes the turn. Mike draws and then casts Season of Growth. He casts Skull Prophet. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike scries 1. Mike passes. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach activates Crawling Barrens twice, putting 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Zach draws and then plays an island for turn. Spitfire triggers, and each opponent takes 1. He casts Agent of Treachery. It enters, and Zach gains control of Ryan's Multani. He moves to combat, attacking Mike with Thunder Drake. Mike blocks with his Chainweb Arachnir. Finished up, Zach passes. At the end of Zach's turn, Mike flashes in Pouncing Shore Shark, mutating it onto Risen Reef. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike draws a card. Mutate triggers, and Mike bounces the non-token Multani back to Ryan's hand. Then the turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws and then plays a forest for turn. Tatyova triggers, and Ryan gains 1 and draws a card. He moves to combat, attacking Zach with Multani and his Colossal Dreadmaw. Zach blocks with everything but his Lagak at Multani. Before damage, Zach casts Baying Veil, giving all of his opponent's creatures -2/-0 until end of turn. Zach then takes 6 and his creatures die. In his second main phase, Ryan casts Multani. He follows up with a Nessian Boar. Ryan passes the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike cycles Shark Typhoon, where X equals 3, drawing a card and making a 3/3 flying shark. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike scries 1. Mike draws and then starts off by mutating Migratory Greathorn onto Pouncing Shore Shark. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike draws a card. Shore Shark triggers, and Mike bounces Ryan's Multani token. Migratory Greathorn triggers, and Mike fetches up a forest onto the battlefield tapped. Mike then mutates Brokkos onto Migratory Greathorn. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike draws a card. Then the mutates trigger, Mike bounces Nessian Boar to Ryan's hand, and then fetches an island onto the battlefield tapped. Mike casts Grim Dancer, having it enter with a Death Touch and a lifelink counter on it. Season of Growth triggers, and Mike scries 1. He casts Nadir Kraken, scrying from Season of Growth. Mike passes the turn. Zach draws and then casts Fisher Wizard, with Zach discarding and drawing as it enters. He casts Tybalt, Rakish Instigator. Thunder Drake triggers and gets a counter. He activates Tybalt, creating a 1/1 Devil token. He attacks Mike with his Thunder Drake. Mike blocks with his token, and then Zack passes to Ryan. Ryan draws and then plays an island for turn. Tatyova triggers, Ryan draws, but doesn't gain life because of Tybalt. He attacks Mike with Multani and Colossal Dreadmaw. Mike blocks Dreadmaw with Brokkos and Multani with Tome Lich. Then Mike dies, along with Ryan's creatures. In his second main phase, Ryan recasts Nessie and Boar. He pays 2 and returns 2 lands to his hand to return Multani from his graveyard to his hand. He recasts Multani. He casts Adventurous Impulse. He looks at the top 3 and reveals a Slinvada, the Rising Deep, into his hand, and then bottoms the rest. Ryan passes the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zack activates Crawling Barrens, putting 2 1/1 counters on it. Then Ryan discards the hand size. Zack draws, looks at Ryan's board, accepts his fate, and then passes the turn. Ryan draws, attacks Zack with everything, and wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, another great game in the bag. Congrats to Ryan on his win. There was a lot of back and forth from trying to stop Ryan's big creatures, but at the end of the day, he was able to push them through. The most valuable card goes to Multani, Yavamaya's avatar. In EDH, this card just naturally becomes very large, and it is very good at connecting. His ability to recur from his graveyard for persistence is what sends this card over the top. If you would like to start your own boxing league with your playgroup, check out the TCG Player link in the description. They have great prices for sealed products, or even just singles if you need them. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. If you liked this video and wanted to help out, please give us a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already subscribed. Also, if you would like to see the raw gameplay of this video, be part of a great community, and have a chance to play with us, consider signing up to our Patreon. There are many tiers and many rewards available, and any support greatly helps us reach our goals. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Okay, wanted to give a Patreon shout out to Brandon Harper, Dustin Maillet, Josh Kovach, Josh Kopp, Baby Jeebus, Mox Rob, Trey Payne, Baskin, Zods, Noah Saldana, Wayan, Isaac Kaja, Spielrahu, there he is again, Road Grode Medflode, CZ, and Nick. Thanks a lot, you guys are all the best.